My name is Kaitlyn, and I just turned 27 today. What should have been a happy celebration at an upscale Chicago restaurant quickly turned into the most shocking moment of my life. While my parents nervously watched, my billionaire grandfather, Walter, who rarely shows up at family gatherings, smiled warmly and asked, "Is the apartment comfortable?" When I replied, "What apartment?" my parents froze in their seats. The look on Grandpa's face changed instantly as he turned to them and asked in an eerily calm voice, "Then where did the money go?" Before everything fell apart that night, I was living what I thought was a normal life. I worked as a graphic designer at a small agency in downtown Chicago, making just enough to cover my bills and occasionally treat myself to a nice coffee. My apartment was nothing special, a two-bedroom in a slightly run-down building that I shared with my roommate, Olivia. The rent was steep, even split between us, but that was city living for you. Our place had character, with mismatched furniture we'd collected over the years and walls covered in art prints and photographs. Despite having a billionaire grandfather, I was proud of making my own way. My parents, Harold and Diane, lived a comfortable upper-middle-class life in the suburbs. They had a five-bedroom house with a pool and took lavish vacations twice a year. I always assumed they were doing well because my dad had a senior position at an insurance company and my mom worked in real estate. They never offered financial help, always emphasizing the importance of working for what you want. When I graduated from art school 4 years ago with nearly $70,000 in student loans, they congratulated me on taking my first steps into adulthood. While other parents helped with down payments or covered a few months of rent to help their kids get started, mine handed me a copy of Dave Ramsey and told me that building character through struggle was important. I never resented them for it. Not really. I was determined to prove I could make it on my own. But there were times when things got tight that I wondered why they seemed so reluctant to help, especially when they would show up in a new luxury car or talk about the kitchen remodel they were planning. Status had always been their love language, even when the math didn't work. Grandpa Walter was an enigma. He had built his fortune in real estate development, starting with nothing and eventually creating one of the largest property companies in the Midwest. He was stern, intimidating, and rarely attended family functions. When he did show up, everyone walked on eggshells. But despite his gruff exterior, he always had a soft spot for me. On the rare occasions we spoke, he asked thoughtful questions about my design work and actually listened to my answers. My cousin Natalie was the only one in our generation who seemed to have benefited from the family wealth. She had a trust fund that gave her a very comfortable lifestyle. She never worked a day in her life, but constantly posted photos from exotic locations and high-end restaurants on social media. Whenever we were at family gatherings together, she would talk about her latest shopping spree or vacation in a way that felt designed to highlight the differences in our situations. The week before my birthday had been particularly rough. The design agency I worked for lost a major client, and I was among the 5 employees who got laid off. With just enough savings to cover maybe 2 months of expenses, I panicked about how I would make rent while searching for a new job in a competitive field. When my parents called to insist on taking me out for a fancy birthday dinner, I tried to decline. I suggested we do something simple instead, maybe order takeout at my apartment, but they were adamant, saying 27 was a special birthday and deserved a proper celebration. Looking back, their insistence makes sense now in a twisted way. There had been signs something was off, little things I brushed aside at the time, like when I mentioned possibly going back to school for a master's degree and my dad immediately shut down the conversation, saying I already had enough student debt, or how my mom would quickly change the subject whenever I talked about my financial struggles. There were hushed phone conversations that would stop when I entered the room and strange tension whenever Grandpa Walter was mentioned. A few months earlier, I had caught my mom looking at properties in Panama online. When I asked if they were planning a vacation, she quickly closed her laptop and said she was just daydreaming. My dad had also been making odd comments about how we might not see each other as often in the future because they were thinking about traveling more. The morning of my birthday, Olivia gave me a handmade card and a small potted plant she knew I'd been eyeing at the local nursery. We had been friends since college, and she knew better than anyone how hard I had been working just to stay afloat. As I got ready for dinner with my parents that night, she helped me put together an outfit that would look nice but was still within my limited wardrobe. I would never have guessed that in just a few hours, everything I thought I knew about my family would be shattered beyond repair. or that the financial struggles I had been facing for years were completely unnecessary. As I applied my mascara and put on my only pair of decent earrings, I had no idea I was about to discover the most painful betrayal imaginable. The restaurant my parents chose for my birthday dinner was one of those places where the menu has no prices listed, which immediately made me uncomfortable. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, and the tables were dressed in crisp white linens. The hostess led us to a table in the center of the dining room, where my parents had already arranged for a bottle of champagne to be waiting on ice. I felt out of place in my simple black dress and the same heels I had worn to job interviews for the past 3 years. My mother was draped in a designer outfit I had never seen before, with a necklace that probably cost more than my rent. My father wore an expensive-looking suit with gold cufflinks that caught the light when he reached for his water glass. The conversation felt forced from the start. They asked surface-level questions about my job search but changed the subject whenever I expressed any real concern. Instead, they kept steering the conversation towards safe topics, like a movie they had recently seen or updates about distant relatives I barely knew. After we ordered, they presented me with their gifts: a designer wallet and a scarf that, while beautiful, seemed strangely modest considering the restaurant they had chosen. As I thanked them, my mother launched into a familiar lecture about financial responsibility and the importance of building good credit. I was halfway through my entree, nodding along to another of my father's college stories, when the atmosphere in the restaurant suddenly shifted. People at nearby tables straightened in their seats, and the staff became noticeably more attentive. I turned to see what had caused the change and spotted him immediately. Grandpa Walter had arrived, accompanied by his assistant, Jennifer, a sharp-looking woman in her 42nd who was rarely more than a few steps away from him. At 82, Walter still cut an imposing figure, tall and straight-backed with a full head of silver hair. He wore a perfectly tailored suit that probably cost more than my yearly salary, and his presence commanded attention without him saying a word. My parents froze mid-conversation, their expressions shifting from surprise to something that looked almost like fear. My father stood quickly, nearly knocking over his water glass in the process. "Walter, this is unexpected," he said, his voice higher than normal. "We weren't sure you would make it." My grandfather ignored him completely, focusing his attention on me instead. His stern expression softened as he approached our table. "Happy birthday, Kaitlyn," he said, leaning down to kiss my cheek. His cologne smelled expensive leather and cedar. 27 years. Hard to believe how quickly time passes. "Thank you, Grandpa," I replied, genuinely touched that he had remembered. "It means a lot that you came." He took the empty seat beside me while Jennifer remained standing, tablet in hand, as if ready to take notes at any moment. "I wanted to check in on how things are going," he said, studying my face with intelligent eyes that missed nothing. "Jennifer tells me the quarterly reports for your investment portfolio look strong. The trust should be performing well in this market." I blinked in confusion. Investment portfolio? Trust? A slight furrow appeared between his eyebrows. "Yes, the trust fund established when you were born. You turned 25 2 years ago, so everything should have been transferred to your control by now." He spoke as if this were common knowledge. My parents were suddenly very interested in their plates. My mother's knuckles had turned white around her fork. "I think there might be some confusion," I said slowly, looking between my grandfather and my parents. "I don't have a trust fund." Walter's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes hardened. "Of course you do. Your cousins as well, though yours was the largest. 5 million initially, plus growth managed by your parents until your 25th birthday, when control was to transfer to you." The restaurant around us seemed to fade away as I struggled to process what he was saying. $5 million a trust fund I never knew about. It made no sense. "And the apartment in the Gold Coast," Walter continued, his voice pleasant but his eyes now fixed on my parents. "Is it comfortable?" "I selected that building specifically because of the security and the views of the lake." "What apartment?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. The silence that followed was deafening. My father had gone pale and my mother looked like she might be sick. Walter's expression remained calm, but there was a dangerous stillness to him now, like the moment before a storm breaks. "You don't know about the apartment," he said. It wasn't a question. The two-bedroom corner unit in Lakeside Tower purchased 2 years ago as your 25th birthday present. I shook my head slowly, my mind racing to make sense of what was happening. Walter turned to my parents with deliberate slowness, his voice dropping to a quiet tone that was somehow more frightening than if he had shouted. "Then where did the money go?" My father started to speak, a tremor in his voice. "Walter, there's been a misunderstanding. We can explain everything." "I sincerely hope so," my grandfather replied, his tone making it clear he didn't believe there was any explanation that would satisfy him. He turned to his assistant. "Jennifer, please call Stanley and have him meet us here immediately." "Already done, sir," Jennifer replied efficiently. "He was at a dinner nearby and should arrive within 10 minutes. I've also contacted security at the office to pull all relevant financial records." The other diners were openly staring now, the drama at our table apparently more interesting than their expensive meals. A waiter hovered nearby, unsure whether to approach. My mother reached across the table for my hand, but I pulled away, a sick feeling growing in the pit of my stomach. "Kaitlyn, sweetheart, this isn't how we wanted to tell you." "Tell me what?" I demanded, my voice rising despite my efforts to stay calm. "That I have a trust fund and an apartment I never knew about? Or that somehow you kept them from me?" My father glanced nervously around at the other diners. "This isn't the place to discuss family matters." "I agree," Walter said coldly. "Jennifer, please arrange for a private room." He turned to me, his expression softening slightly. "Kaitlyn, I promise you will get answers tonight, all of them." The private dining room had dark wood paneling and a long table that could seat 12, making our small group look even more isolated. Walter sat at the head of the table with me to his right. My parents sat across from me, both looking like they wanted to be anywhere else. Jennifer positioned herself near the door, tablet ready, her face professionally blank. We were joined shortly by Stanley Thornton, my grandfather's longtime attorney, a balding man with sharp eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. He carried a leather briefcase that he placed carefully on the table. "I took the liberty of bringing the original trust documents," he said to Walter, "as well as the most recent financial statements." Walter nodded. "Good. Let's start at the beginning for Kaitlyn's benefit." Stanley cleared his throat and addressed me directly. "When you were born, your grandfather established a trust fund in your name with an initial deposit of $5 million. The terms were straightforward. The trust would be managed by your parents as trustees until your 25th birthday, at which point control would transfer entirely to you. The only stipulations were that the money could be used for your education, health, and general welfare prior to your 25th birthday, with all expenditures documented and approved." I stared at him in disbelief. "And no one thought to tell me about this?" "Your parents were instructed to inform you about the trust when you turned 18, Stanley replied, glancing at my father and mother. "Based on your reaction, I gather that didn't happen." "It did not," Walter confirmed, his voice tight with controlled anger. "Nor, apparently, did the transfer of assets at 25. He turned to Stanley. "What is the current value of Kaitlyn's trust?" Stanley pulled several documents from his briefcase and placed them on the table. According to the most recent statement from 3 months ago, the trust had grown to approximately $8.3 million. This includes the original principal plus investment growth, minus authorized expenditures for college tuition and the purchase of the Gold Coast apartment 2 years ago. $8.3 million. The number seemed impossible. While I had been working overtime and skipping meals to make rent, there had been millions of dollars that belonged to me meant for my benefit. "I want to see proof of all withdrawals from the trust over the past 5 years, Walter said to Stanley. As the attorney produced more documents, my father finally spoke up. "Walter, we can explain. There were investments that didn't perform as expected. The money is just temporarily allocated elsewhere." "Allocated where exactly?" Walter asked with dangerous calm. "Part 2 is live now on the channel. Continue the story."